the second of a series of 3 talks we're doing on digital wisdom. And the first one we had Yana Bennett speaking on theological anthropology. And tonight we have our distinguished visitor, Brent Waters, and I'll have more to say about his talk in just a moment. The third talk is coming up. Well, what's the date for the third one, Michael? That's on the 30th, November 30th. So it's our third and final talk on digital wisdom. And what we're trying to do is raise questions and share understanding about how we use technology and how it affects our culture. Dr. Brent Waters, our guest speaker tonight. He's the professor of Christian ethics, and he's the director of the Stead Center for Ethics and Values at Garrett-Evangelical Theological Seminary in Evanston, Illinois. He's the author of multiple books. I won't even read them all here. I mean, mention them all here, but the one that most rings out in the topic tonight is his book that just came out last year on Christian moral theology in an emerging technoculture. And he also has a new book coming out probably in the coming year on economic globalization and Christian ethics, dealing with economic and business issues. He also has books on genetics and technology and Christian understanding of technology and bioethics, which also he serves as a fellow of the Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity at Trinity International University. So as you can tell, he's got a breadth of interests and experience in applying theology to these topics of our age that we're all wrestling with, which is why we're here tonight. He also brings a pastoral heart to this. Following his MDiv degree at Claremont, he went on to serve as a campus minister at University of Iowa and also University of Redlands in California. Another thing that I found really engaging that I enjoyed discussing with him is that his advisor at Oxford University in the UK was the same senior theologian that I wrote my PhD dissertation on, Oliver O'Donovan, and a great philosopher and Christian theologian of morality and ethics and the moral order and what that all means, and political science also. Dr. Waters' principal research interests, you can sum it up by saying it's Christian, social, and political thought, bioethics, and the relationship among theology, science, and technology. And much of his work is centered around this question of how then shall we live? How do we order our lives and our life together around and under the sovereignty, love, and grace of the triune God? So, Dr. Waters, we're delighted to have you here. Please share with us.
Bruce, first of all, thank you for that very kind invitation, or introduction. And also thanks to all the people at Seattle Pacific University for your warm hospitality. Rarely do I feel at home so quickly in a new place, but it's been a delight to be here. I recently read a novel called Wired Love. When do you think it was written? I'm guessing some of you are saying obviously pre-Wi-Fi. So probably long ago in the early 1990s. It was published in 1879, and its subtitle is A Romance of Dots and Dashes. The author, Ella Thayer, tells the story of a budding romance between 2 telegraph operators. I refer to this blast from the past to serve as a reminder. It is now commonplace to assume that we are living in an era when everything is changing quickly, perhaps too rapidly for some. In many respects, this is true. But in other respects, nothing much has really changed. Texting is really not all that different from the telegraph, except that Morse code has been swapped for binary code. Yet admittedly, there is a difference, and an important one. The 2 words that I think best portray the emerging technoculture in which you and I reside are velocity and mobility. We can now do a lot of things very quickly. We are riding the crest of an accelerating wave that has been building momentum for quite some time. To return to the 19th century, At the beginning of Queen Victoria's reign, it took weeks, even months, to exchange communiques with ambassadors and colonial administrators scattered across the world. By the end of her reign, the time was reduced to weeks, even hours, with the aid of a global telegraph network. Today, the simplest person, when armed with a smartphone, can exchange messages around the world in a matter of seconds. Moreover, we do our work, our banking, investing, shopping, and we access articles, blogs, books, music, images, and videos with ease, expending little time and effort, and we increasingly take it for granted. Life in the emerging technoculture is fast and frenetic, and the more greater velocity at our command, all the better. Life in the emerging technoculture is also highly mobile, both physically and imaginatively. In a few hours, we can travel almost anywhere in the world we might choose. Or using various technologies, we can virtually visit remote locales, either past or present, or spend time in imaginary worlds of our own making. The constraints of location are increasingly being overcome. Recall the tasks of working, banking, shopping, and the like that I mentioned just a little while ago. To a large extent, we can accomplish those tasks anywhere, anytime we might choose, so long as we are connected to the internet or the mysterious and ubiquitous cloud. Living and working in the emerging technoculture can be done anywhere and nowhere in particular. Given this combination of velocity and mobility, the residents of the emerging technoculture are nomadic. By nomadic, I'm referring to a growing number of people who, with the assistance of information and transportation technologies, do not perceive physical location as a determinative or even decisive factor in respect to their work, leisure, or identity. For these late modern nomads, any distinction between local and global has become blurred because anything stationary is transitory and tentative. In short, the nomads inhabiting the emerging technoculture perceive the world as a place they may wander as they will. And in the spirit of full disclosure, I am a nomad. I live in Hampton, Pennsylvania, but the school where I teach is in Evanston, Illinois, and the 412-mile commute does not strike me as odd or even cumbersome. For to a large extent, it does not matter where I am to get much of my work done. So how should Christians respond to this emerging nomadic technoculture? There are two obvious but ultimately bad options. The first option is to perceive the emerging technoculture as a godless realm of consumerism, materialism, and hedonism that corrodes one's relationship with God and neighbors. Consequently, Christians should adopt lifestyles that steadfastly resist the corrupting influence of a nomadic world in which they have the misfortune now to be stuck. Time to hunker down and try to survive this exile in Techno-Babylon. This is a bad option because it is based on an unwarranted fear, technophobia, if you will. Such fear fails to recognize that our nomadic neighbors inhabit a world that was created and still loved by God. And Christians should not loathe what God loves. Moreover, this option fails to receive the counsel of Scripture, in which the exiles are urged to settle down, build homes, engage in commerce, and most importantly, to pray for the peace of Babylon. Even if many aspects of the emerging technoculture trouble a Christian, it is nonetheless part of a world in which one bears witness to their Lord. The second option is to perceive this new nomadic culture as an unproblematic godsend. What is wrong with the freedom that various technologies enable us to enjoy? Moreover, with steady and unfettered technological advances, we can create a virtual heaven on earth. We will be able to meet the material wants and needs of more and more people on a global scale, liberating them from cruel and crushing poverty. How could any Christian complain about building the new Techno-Jerusalem? This is a bad option because it is based on unwarranted love, technophilia, if you will. Admittedly, this option has many appealing features, For who indeed could be against greater freedom or improving the material well-being of people? But this option too fails to heed the warning of Scripture against idolatry. It is God, and God alone, who should be loved with our entire being, and is therefore the sole source of trust and confidence. It is God and not technology that will save us. Technophilia confuses ends with means. The purpose of technology is not to enable us to build a new Techno-Jerusalem, but to help us prepare the world to receive God's promised city as a gift and not an artifact of our will. If these are both bad options, then how should Christians respond? The response should be both critical and constructive. The emerging technoculture certainly has its problems, even perils, that need to be identified and addressed, but it is not Babylon. The emerging technoculture also offers great promise that should be welcomed, but it is no Jerusalem. Rather, our present circumstances are, as always, part of a fallen world, a mixture of promise and peril, good and evil, sin and grace. And as Martin Luther and George Grant remind us, we must deal with the thing as it is and not what we might prefer. Presumably, it should be easy for Christians to engage their nomadic neighbors, for they share many things in common. Christians are a mobile people. Christianity has never been a territorial religion. The church exists wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in the name of Jesus Christ. In serving their Lord, Christians are always on the move, going wherever in the world God calls them to be, for however short or long a period of time is needed. And the speed of their journeys may sometimes be slow, sometimes fast. But there is an important difference. Christians are not nomads. They are pilgrims. Their life is one of perpetual pilgrimage. Using St. Augustine's imagery of the 2 cities, Christians are citizens of the heavenly city, but they presently reside in the earthly city. Consequently, they are never entirely at home anywhere in the world. And they are always a bit restless, anticipating their final destination of eternal fellowship with God. In the meantime, they are called to bear witness to their Lord within the earthly city and to love and serve their neighbors in Christ's name. How then might pilgrims go about engaging their nomadic neighbors in a faithful manner? In the remainder of this lecture, I explore briefly what such a critical and constructive engagement might entail. To begin this exploration, we must first turn our attention away from the array of gadgets and machines that pervade our current circumstances and take a look at some of the underlying values and desires driving the emerging technoculture. In other words, what do the machines that we use, take for granted, tell us about who we are and what we desire? We may then catch a glimpse by looking at 3 preferences of the emerging technoculture. First, there is a preference of space over place. By space, I mean a physical or virtual locale that is chosen and temporary, whereas place is a material location that is given and endured. To illustrate the difference, as might be expected, late modern nomads spend a lot of time in airports. They are not only staging areas for travelers, but also beehives of feverish activity. There are swarms of people rushing to and fro from gates, and a din of conversation pervades nearly every corner of an airport. But few are interacting with anyone else in the building. Most are on their smartphones or tablets, either talking, emailing, texting, tweeting, surfing, reading, writing, or listening to music. They are busy creating their private spaces in the midst of a shared place where they would prefer not to be. Technologies are employed that effectively erect borders to maintain spaces that are not predicated upon either common locale or time. Those in close proximity are not admitted to these protected spaces because they are not needed or relevant. The resulting indifference or even rudeness, however, is not the principal issue at stake. There is nothing inherently wrong with creating such spaces when privacy is required. Indeed, the advent of handy gadgets aiding the preservation of private space is a welcome revenge of the introverted against the gregarious. What is troubling is when it is believed that space is an adequate substitute that can entirely supersede place. Our identities are formed in relationships and communities comprised of people both of and not of our choosing. Spaces tend to exclude, while places tend to include. Moreover, one needs to be in place for formative relationships to endure and flourish over time, something that a strong desire for speed and mobility do not promote. Posting on Facebook, for instance, is not the same thing as a face-to-face conversation. What happens to a sense of self and others when we increasingly see all interactions as nothing but a series of temporary constructs, unrelated to the previous one? Now, it may be objected that my unease is misplaced. Late modern nomads know the difference between the real and the virtual, despite the privileging of space over place, the corresponding fascination with technology. Yet, as Sherry Turkle contends in her words, technology proposes itself as the architect of our intimacies. These days, it suggests substitutions that put the real on the run. Increasingly, more people are becoming comfortable with a fabricated world and are happy with an illusion of intimacy it provides and the ease with which technology can mask loneliness. Virtual companions are more reliable and less likely to disappoint, therefore providing relationships the way we want them. To revisit the story of wired love, there is a scene when the two telegraph operators finally meet face to face, and they become so flustered that they need to scamper back to their telegraph offices in order to redeem an awkward conversation. It was easier to mediate their relationship through dots and dashes than in the physical presence of each other. To simply reassure ourselves that we need not worry because we know the difference between the virtual and the real is naive. For as Turkle baldly states, gradually we come to see our online life as life itself. In the novel, All the Sad Young Literary Men, there is a poignant moment when a young, promising author believes that both his work and life are shrinking because his Google searches of himself produce fewer and fewer hits. If he disappears altogether from Google, will he cease for all practical purposes to exist? We cannot live within space alone. Second, there is a preference for information over narration. Late modern nomads want to know a little about a lot of things, and they want to know it quickly. Information is useful in creating those temporary spaces which in which identities are formed and then expressed. What is not needed or wanted are long and complicated stories that require an extended period of time to understand and then to contemplate. Unlike information, good narration does not lend itself to being easily manipulated. It's a package deal, but pulls the reader or listener into its domain, often prompting unanticipated moments of prolonged thinking, pondering, and deliberation. Information is admittedly useful. It's far better to be informed than not, and that's a good rule. But information cannot do the work that only narration can do. We are both implicitly and explicitly story-formed people. We are shaped by the stories we read and those we tell. And a story is not just conveying or receiving information. Rather, a true and compelling story requires its acceptance as such, prompting corresponding changes in one's outlook and actions. The gospel, for example, is not simply a collection of religious information that can be profitably plundered and used at will, but a story that captures and transforms a person's being and doing. Following Hannah Arendt, knowing and thinking are not synonymous. Knowledge of certain facts and skills enables one to accomplish certain tasks. For example, you need to know how to write to be a writer. In this respect, Bacon was right. Knowledge is power. But knowledge alone does not lead to meaning. This requires sustained and disciplined thinking about important but complex ideas and arguments, a wrestling with narration rather than a mastery of information. Simply knowing how to write does not guarantee that an author will write anything worth reading. More importantly, Arendt worried that in the absence of such thinking, a person's conscience remains underdeveloped, as witnessed by the banality and shallowness of Adolf Eichmann. This difference between knowing and thinking, between information and narration, has some important educational implications. To oversimplify, the primary purpose of a school to give, or even sell, its students knowledge, or to help them think. Now, the two are admittedly not unrelated, but I believe that increasingly we are emphasizing knowledge and information given the demands of a nomadic society. This tension is increasingly being felt even at the seminary where I teach. Now, there are certain things that all students preparing for the ministry simply need to know, such as how to prepare a sermon and which end of the baby to baptize. But I am increasingly encountering students who want to know some information about such key doctrines as Christology and eschatology, but are not too keen on thinking through what these doctrines might mean for their lives and ministries. They want to know about the faith. They really don't want to know the faith. I fear that over time, ministry may be reduced to performance rather than a pastoral relationship that helps people to enter into a deeper and fuller relationship with Christ. In short, we need informed knowledge, but it is not enough. We also require thoughtful narration of what our lives mean. Third and finally, there is a preference for exchange over communication. Exchange is a basic and common human activity. I give you something, and you give me something in return. Without exchange, our lives would be deeply impoverished because it is almost impossible to live a life of complete self-sufficiency. This is why modern economies are based on the specialization of labor in order to produce a vast range of goods and services that can be exchanged. In contrast, communication is derived from the Greek word koinonia, and it can be translated variously as community, communion, or to communicate. Unlike an exchange in what yours becomes mine and mine becomes yours, what is yours and mine become ours. To communicate means sharing certain goods that bind a people or community together. To reiterate, exchange is terribly important, and various technologies both enable and enlarge opportunities for exchange on a global scale. It is easy to see why exchange is a key feature of the emerging technoculture. For its nomadic inhabitants require easy access to information, goods, and services that can be produced and consumed rapidly, and almost any time and anywhere. But the technologies enabling such rapid and easy exchange are also rendering the parties to these exchanges increasingly invisible. To illustrate, let us imagine that I need a new laptop computer so I can continue to write books and articles that are read by very few people. While on a trip in a hotel room, late at night, I order the laptop of my dreams online and request delivery on the day that I will return home. In the few minutes that it took me to complete this task, I initiated a series of global transactions and exchanges. Although the lead office of the company from which I purchased the computer is located in California, the server hosting the website is in Vancouver. An office worker in Dublin reviews and processes my order. The hardware and software are manufactured in such places as Bucharest, Seattle, Seoul, and Taipei. My dream computer is assembled in Shanghai and air freighted and delivered to my door at the time promised by a corporation headquartered in Memphis. What I want to emphasize in this scenario is the range of exchanges that I participated in, involving many different people at the various stages of manufacturing, sales, and delivery. cutting across various geographic locations, time zones, national and jurisdictional boundaries. Presumably all the parties have benefited from these exchanges. I got my computer, workers received wages, and corporations generated a profit. Yet the entire process is anonymous. I don't anticipate ever meeting anyone who participated in these exchanges. Moreover, within the emerging technoculture, the parties to an exchange are rendered effectively invisible. When I click purchase this item, rarely if ever do I have in mind all the people required to obtain my wanted item. All I have in mind is they're going to send me the stuff I want. Now don't get me wrong, I am not opposed to anonymous exchange. I don't think my life would be terribly enriched if I had lengthy conversations with every banker, merchant, and sales representative that I do business with. I'm certainly not going to come to Seattle and accuse Amazon of being bad or evil. After all, I spend a lot of time on their website, and I'm even a Prime member. All I want to do is to bring to our attention that increasingly anonymous and invisible exchanges have their costs and their limits. At the most basic level, it needs to be recognized that exchange taking place in a physical marketplace that enabled the flourishing of local communities is different than the exchange occurring in an amorphous global market space. There's a difference between marketplace and market space. A trivial example. One day I went to the barber shop where I live, and after getting my hair cut, realized I didn't have any cash, and my barber does not accept credit cards. I suggested that I go to the bank to get some money and offered my mobile phone as a hostage to ensure my payment. She rejected my offer and told me to pay her the next time I was in the area. I doubt if a familiar arrangement would ever occur on any commercial website, including my beloved Amazon. Although too much should not be read into this example, it nevertheless reveals an important element underpinning exchange, namely familiarity and trust. Over the years, my barber and I have become familiar to each other, and she trusts that I will pay her for a haircut as I always has done in the past. On that embarrassing day, she assumed that my empty wallet was the result of my absent-mindedness. I am, after all, a professor, and not a ploy to deceive her. But more broadly, we run into each other occasionally at the grocery store or some public event, and we chat about topics other than haircuts. There is a sense that we share, however vaguely and tenuously, a larger association that, although supported by commercial activities, is not entirely determined by exchange. In short, we communicate, at least a little bit. More importantly, it also needs to be recognized that in some instances, exchange is not a fitting thing to do at all, and can prove to be a distraction or worse. Parents, for instance, should not bill their children for the care they provide. Although that was tempting at my daughter's wedding, but that's a different issue. Rather, as a family, they communicate shared goods over time. Okay. Exchange is good, but it cannot buy the good life. Now, a brief pause to review. So far, I have argued that within the emerging technoculture, there is a preference for space over place, information over narration, and exchange over communication. Space, information, and exchange are not inherently bad or evil, but they are inadequate substitutes for place, narration, and communication that are required if humans are to flourish, or what Christians call the abundant life. So how might Christians critically and constructively engage their surrounding culture in ways that preserve place, narration, and communication? In the time remaining, I want to suggest 3 traditional focal practices that Christians might use usefully in keeping in mind when engaging their nomadic neighbors, namely baptism, Sabbath, and Eucharist. Baptism. Baptism tends to be associated with the spiritual rebirth or second birth. True, but it is also an embodied act. It is embodied persons that are sprinkled or immersed, and baptism does not free them from the needs, necessities, or limitations of their bodies. It was as embodied beings that we were created by God, and it is as embodied creatures, as an embodied creature, that the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. Additionally, baptism is the rite of initiation that incorporates the baptized into the church, which is the body of Christ on earth. And whenever 2 or 3 are gathered, the body exists, and there has to be some place to gather. The vocabulary of Christian faith is thoroughly laced with body language. Christians have never believed that a human being is a soul trapped in a body. We are rather simultaneously embodied souls and ensouled bodies. And it is as such that we are created, baptized, and saved. I have no desire to enter the debate over whether or not the church can exist or even thrive in cyberspace. But it would be a sad day if in the future the church succumbs to the Gnostic temptation of dismissing physical bodies and their location as sheer irrelevancies. Now, embodied people need places in order to exist and flourish. Despite all the advantages that created, virtual, and temporary spaces offer, every nomad is in some place at every moment. Even the most fast-paced, mobile nomad must stop at some place for a while to sleep, to eat, to recharge the batteries of their gadgets. As I mentioned previously, nomads and pilgrims share some commonalities, but with this important caveat. In their baptism, Christians admit they are not really of this world. Consequently, wherever in the world God happens to call them to be, for however a short or lengthy period of time, it is the place where they belong and need to be attentive to and serve its particular needs. To borrow from Iris Murdoch, it is through the just and loving gaze that we come to know what our neighbors need, and then to serve them accordingly in the name of the one in whom we are baptized. You can't do such gazing on the run or at a distance. You must be in the same place at the same time. In remembering their baptism, Christians might suggest something like the following to their nomadic neighbors. Stay in place for a while. It's good for both body and soul. Sabbath. Sabbath is most often associated with rest. There is, of course, nothing wrong with resting. Even God rested after creation. But when rest and Sabbath become virtually synonymous, the practice of keeping Sabbath can easily degenerate into episodic and nostalgic attempts at recapturing a slower and less hectic pace of life. The word that should be more closely associated with Sabbath is leisure. By this, I do not mean a hobby, recreational, or avocational pursuit. Rather, Sabbath is a stance or orientation that is receptive instead of proactive. In Joseph Pieper's words, an attitude of mind, a contemplative attitude, and it is not only the occasion but also the capacity for steeping oneself in the whole of creation. According to Pieper, leisure is the affirmation of one's being, an act that is effortless, for it entails receiving as opposed to making or creating. In our leisure, we are given knowledge or understanding of ourselves in creation, requiring an openness that refrains from intervening and mastering. This talk of Sabbath leads us back to the previous distinction between information and knowledge as opposed to narration and thinking. The root of the word leisure is also the root of the word school. Ideally, education is leisurely contemplation, which I assume all of your students here are enjoying each day. A state of being receptive, which is closely akin to narration and thinking. Now, are the schools in the emerging technoculture offering places for leisure, or in contrast providing immediately useful information and knowledge? To be practical, I understand the need to quicken the pace for earning a degree and distance and online learning to meet the needs of an increasingly nomadic society. I understand that. But I worry about unforeseen consequences should schools become only knowledge factories rather than places of sustained and disciplined thinking. Is there no room in the late modern university or seminary for Sabbath-based learning? I believe this is a crucial question posed by the emerging technoculture. For like a fine wine or single malt whiskey, good thinking requires time at a leisurely pace. Well, I won't say any more about that. Perhaps Christian pilgrims should say to their nomadic neighbors something to the effect, practice Sabbath. It's good for your body, soul, and mind. Eucharist. The Eucharist encapsulates the life of the baptized. It is at the Lord's table that our sins are judged, confessed, and forgiven. It is in partaking of Christ's body and blood that we are renewed and empowered to be Christ's body on earth. This sacrament is the lifeblood of the church. But know well, there are no exchanges at this table. You cannot buy the bread and wine, but only receive them as gifts. And they are not for your keeping, but to be communicated in sharing the fellowship of the table. Can the admittedly restricted fellowship of the Lord's table suggest any broader implications for supporting communicative associations within the larger society? I think so. The following simple example illustrates how communicating common or shared goods can be pursued within a thoroughly secular context. Niall Ferguson notes that when he bought a new seaside home, he was dismayed by the amount of rubbish on the beach. Each day when he took a walk, he filled a trash bag, but this did little to solve the problem. He recruited a few volunteers to clean up the beach, but even collectively, they were not up to the task. It was not until the local Lions Club got involved that the beach was cleaned up and kept clean. And he doubts that the new social networks of the internet are in any sense a substitute for these real networks. What should be stressed in this example is not that the unorganized efforts of individuals are not able to communicate the shared good of a clean, or what should be stressed is in this example is that the unorganized efforts of individuals were not up to communicate the shared good of a clean beach. What was required was an association, the local Lions Club, that was dedicated to community service. For Ferguson, this episode disclosed the power of the voluntary association as an institution. Together, spontaneously, without any public sector involvement, without any profit motive, without any legal obligation or power, we had turned a depressing dumping ground back into a beauty spot. Now, my point is not to commend the Lions Club, but to lift up the fact that exchange is not the only motivator of worthwhile action. Communicating shared goods is simply good for a community comprised of particular people in a particular place at a particular time. And Christians should know this because of what they do at their Lord's table and support whatever other efforts are undertaken to form and sustain communicative associations. Exchange is important, but it should serve to enable rather than replace communication. For the good life is ultimately one that is shared and not bought and sold. To conclude, if I were to try to summarize my lecture in as pithy a manner as possible, it would go something like this. Christians should invite their nomadic neighbors to become pilgrims because it is a better life. This invitation, however, requires that Christians order their lives in ways that demonstrate why their life of pilgrimage is in fact better. So rather simplistically, all I have said this evening is that if Christians want to faithfully engage the emerging technoculture, they should remember their baptism, practice Sabbath, partake of Eucharist, and allow these practices to form and shape them in obedience to Jesus Christ. Thank you.
Well, Brent, thank you very much indeed for that talk. You've given us a lot to think about and how we apply these concepts to our lives. So to help us do that, we have a couple of respondents now who will come up and join you, I think, and get this discussion going. And then we'll hear from the audience also. We'll invite a time of Q&A, but Patrick, can you please come forward? Jessica, please. So I'd like to introduce our co-panelists here tonight to you. Some of you know them. Some of you know Professor Patrick McDonald, professor here at SPU, professor of philosophy, who has written and spoken on these philosophical and theological ethical issues. And then I also like to introduce Jessica Jerre from Microsoft. Jessica has been in the high technology management positions for 20 years now. And the last 9 years in management at Microsoft, where she's a senior manager in the cloud enterprise group. And so she brings a wealth of technology and industry experience. And before that, she's been at Quantum Corporation and Ernst & Young and Yahoo. So she brings a very nice perspective. Thank you, Jessica, for being here tonight with us. So let me start off with Patrick. And Patrick, how would you respond to what Brent has shared with us?
All right, well, I wrote it up. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thanks to everybody for being here. Brent, thanks very much for the stimulating and encouraging reflections. Brent boldly frames the question of how to engage the emerging technoculture as a Christian in terms of a better life. That's a bold thing to say these days. He enjoins Christians to order their lives in ways that demonstrate why their life of pilgrimage is in fact better. And he lucidly frames the challenge in sacramental terms. Remember our baptism, practice Sabbath, and partake of Eucharist. Of course, Brent seems to mean this literally, but he also, as a good moral theologian, urges us to weave the sacramental gifts into daily practice. His approach relies more on effective witness through practice than on preaching to the restless nomadic culture. Arguments may need to be had when it comes to policy, but Brent's approach has more to do with lives of witness than it does with telling the broader culture what to do or to believe about technology. And I applaud him in this. For purposes of full disclosure, I'll just say I'm an odd one to comment on Brent's thoughts given where I lie in the technophobia philia spectrum. I've never owned a cell phone, much less a smart one. I bike commute. Proud achievements of my summer included installing old bookshelves in my office that I salvaged from a retiring colleague, and setting up a turntable there to play my parents' old vinyl records. But I'm not a total technophobe. I also use my email to query Bruce about details concerning the talk, and to obtain a copy of Brent's talk, and to get access to Brent's recent book via e-copy when the paper one was checked out. I didn't read it all, but you know. So like many finding their way through the fire hose of the newer, sleeker, faster, I'm picking and choosing my battles. Brent offers helpful guidance to frame our choices and orient ourselves as we go forward. The question of the good life, of course, must be addressed. As Christians, God is and must be central to our answer. Yet it's often not clear where to go from there. Brent's three preference contrasts shed light on this task anyway, in setting up a framework for engaging it. So that is the space versus place, information versus narrative, and exchange versus communication. The emphasis on place, narrative, and truly human communication helps to prepare ourselves in the ongoing technocultural dialogue. And I mean prepare ourselves more than, it doesn't give us answers, it doesn't give us a set of criteria, but dwelling within those contrasts, thinking about their meaning, might help us to engage in some of the practices, both baptism, Sabbath, and Eucharist, and other spiritual formation practices that help us to discern as we go on the ongoing task. Coupled with the sacramental practices, they function not as criteria, but as forms of life to engage well. The three preference contrasts speak to the notion of spiritual and existential home versus homelessness. So this is the place where maybe I push back a little bit on one point that Brent made. And when I wrote this, I had forgotten that he had mentioned home. I thought I was being original. So this is home versus homelessness. So first of all, there's no doubt that the material question of home versus homeless is hugely important. But the one I'm talking about is another one, and it's the spiritual one. One bold claim is that lives defined more by space, information, and exchange seem to verge upon spiritual homelessness, that they're tending towards rootlessness and a crisis of meaning that goes with it. Brent's way of the pilgrim proceeds by seeking place, narrative, and communication through sacramental practices. For this is how one makes a home of creation, as opposed to roaming about restlessly in it as a nomad who's always a bit lost. As Christians, we feel a tension in calling the creation home. Now, Brent did mention this. I won't go into scriptures or theological traditions. I think he cited Augustine, among others, and George Grant. We could bring many to speak to this tension, and it is a tension. But as God's stewards called to care for the creation, to tend it as a garden for which we have been given a sacred charge, we need to embrace creation as home. That does not mean it's our permanent or ultimate home, but neither is it to be treated as disposable, as a series of Motel 6s I wrote in another version of this paper. Baptism links us to the bodily basis of this home. Sabbath to the leisure needed to contemplate and embrace its depths, and Eucharist to foster the discourse that shapes community. To conclude, Brent has called us to cultivate our sense of place. In this spirit, let me shout out one of the best tools I've recently found to facilitate an encounter with Seattle as place. It's this book, and this book is called Seattle Stairway Walks, and it's by Jake and Kathy, and I hope I don't say their name wrong. I didn't look it up. Jaramillo, that's how I would say it. And it's a name that's rooted in the Latin tradition. This book, and we can send it around the hall. I think you should all hold it in your hands. All right, let's make this a place, not a mere space. All right, you have to hold it in your hands. All right, this book brilliantly leads the reader through a series of different walks in the city that are centered around the many old public staircases scattered throughout the various neighborhoods. There are a number of long and steep such staircases within a mile of where we live, or where we are anyway. Each walk I've taken is carefully designed. I've taken a few of them. Each one I've experienced, and I've read about a number of other ones. They're carefully designed to highlight the unique landscape of the given neighborhood, and neighborhoods all over the city. And of course, as much as possible, feature a stunning view of Lake Washington, Puget Sound, and the mountains. But this book is no anti-technology manifesto. The stairs, the book, the links in the book to the website, the cityscape itself, they're all technologies. The beauty of the book is that it leads us to explore the city as place in a new and deeper way. It encourages living engagement at a leisurely pace, and in doing so, allows for deeper communication. So let's honor Brent's advice and check it out. Thank you very much.
Well, Brent, I really appreciate your call to love nomads, our nomad neighbors. I'm a local resident of the Technoculture here in Seattle, one of the technocrats, if you will. So listening to you talk, I felt a few things. One was I felt like the ruler going to Jesus going, well, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? So one of the things that really struck me was your description of exchange versus community or communication. So one of the questions I have is, since we all belong to this technoculture, and the way you describe communication was there's a place of trust and familiarity. How do we think about those folks that are outside our technoculture? So how do we think about the poor, the folks that don't have access to technology in light of our own access and our own accumulation? And how might the disciplines help in our thinking?
Well, I think at two levels. Number one, even though that they're not fully participating in it, they're still nonetheless deeply affected by it. And to keep that in mind, that our exchanges have implications for people that we will never know. And it is going to shape your life, and just realize that's part of it. The second thing is how do you involve them? Because and I know this is controversial, but I mean, if you really take the notion of the preferential option for the poor, and you look at our contemporary world, markets are the only realistic game in town. So how do you get them into global markets, particularly through technology, so that they can in fact participate and improve material well-being? Because I mean, if China and India are any indication, it does work, or at least beginning to relieve portions of dire poverty. But the question then is to say, okay, but what effect is that going to have then upon their traditional communities, upon traditional supports, and is it a trade-off? I mean, the question I've pondered, and I don't know the answer to it, is can communities survive affluence? I don't know. I mean, I've lived my entire life in suburbia, and it seems natural for me not to know my neighbors, because I just assume I'm self-reliant. Now I know it's a myth, I know it's not true, but it's comfortable and it's easy. I think community is hard, and maybe one of the things that binds communities together is that they actually realize they need each other. I think increasingly affluence and technoculture makes that less and less visible as how we view each other. Creates illusion.
Are there disciplines that we can practice that would help us in this area?
Well, I mean, first of all, isn't it simply looking, I mean, I'm going to go back to Iris Murdoch's notion of what she calls attention. And to really understand the needs of the neighbor, you have to attend to them, to be attentive. And then you begin to see, okay, what are their needs? And what Iris Murdoch wanted to say is the problem in this process, and it's her line, not mine, is always the big fat ego gets in the way. So how do you remove the big fat ego out of the way to really just be saying, okay, what does this person need, rather than me telling them what they need? And how that gets translated into actual concrete action, I don't know, but I think that's at least the first kind of step. Because what's really struck me when you talk about like international development, there's a wonderful book out now called The Tyranny of Experts. Because the experts come in thinking they already know what the appropriate question and answer is, rather than simply asking people who are going to be recipients of the aid, what do you need? So I think it might be at least one discipline to begin to say is, we don't come in armed with the answer because we haven't even bothered to ask the questions yet.
Thank you very much. I think that the line of questioning here is helping us to begin and try to apply some of what Brent's given us. To me, a very helpful and important and necessary reminder of our identity and how to face technology. But where do we go from there? And the discussion now feels like it's starting to get turned towards disciplines, spiritual disciplines. What do we do about it? Is it really just to simply oversimplify it, to boil it down to attentiveness? Is that where technology gets in our way? Or what else is going on here?
Yeah, well, technologies are wonderful distractions.
Okay.
I mean, when I really have a hard problem at work I don't really want to face, I go to my inbox.
Yeah,
So
I understand that.
Distracts my attention, or I hope for a phone call or something like that. So I think we can allow technologies to distract us from what we really know is important, and it's very easy to do.
Okay.
And that's one of the disciplines, is saying really what's important and what do I need to get it done, and how can the technologies help me to get it done rather than provide a distraction.
Right. So are there constructive ways to design and use the technology then to help us deal with that issue? Well, what do you all think? What questions do you have?
I was going to suggest that maybe Jessica could share with you a way of breaking down exchange and replacing it with community within the office of an often very impersonal environment.
Al was setting me up.
That's cool.
So one of the things that I do at my work, so before I came to Washington, I used to have a candy dish on my desk, and everyone would come, from the secretary to the highest person in the office. Well, when I moved to Seattle, I realized that the candy dish wasn't going to work because people were too health conscious around here. So I needed to upgrade a little bit, and so now I have an automated espresso machine. So that it's one touch, it grinds the beans, and it's really good craft espresso beans, and then, you know, spits out a short cup or a long cup. And what that does is folks come in and have coffee with me and shoot the breeze, and that just has created an atmosphere of hospitality. It also, you know, forces people to stop a little bit, right, and talk, as opposed to just grabbing their coffee and going, which they can do in the kitchen. So that's something I've done, and actually this morning I wasn't in my office and they were complaining because they couldn't have my coffee. So yeah, it's called Cafe J, so if you're ever on campus, you can come by and come by my cafe.
That's beautiful. It's an illustration of hospitality.
Yeah, so it's just a little way to create community.
Thank you. What else? What else is on your minds? Yeah, please.
You mentioned about this anonymity. I just quite like that story with your barber and you. So can we say that I was actually shocked by one of the concepts of Karl Marx's alienation. Like from the Industrial Revolution, it took from the worker that act from the craftsmanship to they transformed them to industrial workers, and they alienated from their actual work. So now, in this digital revolution, are we alienated from our life? And is this like a continuation? Do you see any linkages between these two revolutions?
Yeah, I mean, there's certain aspects, I think, of any job anywhere you're going to be alienated from. I mean, I don't care how exciting it is. It's just, it goes with work. And in some, particularly if you need the specialization, labor increasing, you need tunnel vision for organizations you work with. And I understand the need for that. In my life, the alienation comes at faculty meetings because these are just mind-numbing, waste of time. Okay. So nothing gets done. But yeah, and I think in some sense that's inevitable. But the question then becomes is do I allow the alienation then to define and dictate my life? And I think the question of that is where communication comes in, was saying that probably my communicative associations are not going to exist in my workplace to a large extent. They're probably going to be voluntary. They're probably going to be formed with other kinds of common tasks, like families, communities, and it will not necessarily be work-oriented. So personally, I'm very comfortable with kind of a bifurcation of work life. I think some people call it work-life balance. One of the reasons I enjoy living 412 miles away from where I'm employed is when I'm away, they leave me alone because they haven't figured out they can actually communicate with me at a distance, and that's fine. I don't want to dissuade them. And also, what my wife has recognized is she said she doesn't like the arrangement, but she made two observations. She said, for the first time I'm married, now when you're home, you're really home. Because I'm focused there. She also said the other thing too is your domestic skills have improved dramatically. Because I actually learned that dishes really don't clean themselves. That you have to, actually someone has to do this, and if you're the only person, well, it's you. So now I just sort of figure out, things need to be washed. So I think, and that's the other part of it, is that it's not so much that the technoculture is bad, but I think it provides distractions so that you don't focus on that which is most important. And in some ways, being on the run all the time gives you an opportunity to avoid asking that question. Because it's a difficult question, it's not an easy one.
Follow-up questions? Yeah, please.
So you mentioned, Hannah Arendt's concept of thinking and knowing, and she also writes about comprehension, right? And so how do you feel like technology either helps or, enables or disables us to comprehend, the state of the world, or even just each other's realities, right? Because I think equally well, I made the argument that technology, helps us comprehend other people's realities, you can also make an argument it goes the other way around. So what do you think from a Christian perspective? Where does that stand?
Again, I think it's how you pose the technology itself, being able to come to understanding or to simply distract understanding. And again, with your rent, you have that wonderful notion of, again, where she makes a distinction between work and labor. And you have to be very careful about are we engaging, because what she sees as work is what really humans do to try to gain immortality. Where actually most of our life is involved in labor, which is very mundane. It's responding to natural necessities, it's responding to very common kinds of pursuits. And what she says is we are not sufficiently attentive to the necessity of labor. Because in the modern world, we all want to be immortal, and therefore we all think we work. And therefore, things which are actually very important in our lives, like housework, cleaning, taking care of other people, becomes disvalued and devalued. When in fact, if we're saying, no, those are kind of important. And it's not the works that we think make us immortal that should claim all of our attention. So it also warms my heart that someone's actually read Hannah Arendt. And I think also her work, which can actually help us think through about creativity as a notion of natality. The possibility is something new can actually happen. And therefore, be open to that possibility. And there's where I think technology is a wonderful tool, because it has expanded the imagination as to what is possible, and we're very surprised about what is possible when we start using certain kinds of technologies. And again, in even simple ways. I mean, to show that, think how long it took to wash clothes 100 years ago. And what the difference is now is that it has also freed us to do certain kinds of things and to enrich our lives that we take for granted now. And I think she could serve as a reminder, I think very profitably for many people, of the necessity of the everyday, mundane, and not to devalue that. I mean, I think it's fine. It's very interesting to me that I learned probably more about my understanding of the Holy Spirit reading a Jewish philosopher than I've read many Christian theologians, because of the insight that she has into the human condition.
I would hate to let this moment go by with this audience without following up on one thing you said about education. You call education leisurely contemplation. And as educators, we're constantly facing the challenge of trying to produce more education with fewer and fewer resources and fewer contact hours. As we a community gathered here, how do we react to the way technology is shaping our educational experience? And perhaps you could comment on what your observations are. You're in the thick of it. How does it affect our ability to do what it is we think is important here?
It's because we get fixated on the process and not the outcome.
We get fixated on the process rather than not the outcome.
Rather than the outcome.
Okay.
So, for example, if
Yeah.
I had my way, and I'm never going to get it, because we're going through curriculum reform again at the seminary for the fourth time. And I've gotten somewhat jaded. I mean, I've never encountered a curriculum I can't subvert. So, if I had my way, get rid of units, get rid of time, to say demonstrate X amount of outcomes. I don't care how you get there.
Because those are things that are trying to measure the process.
Right.
Is that what you're saying? Okay.
So I measure the outcomes. So like for an MDiv, it's usually 3 years.
Yeah.
So it usually takes more because it's part-time.
Yeah.
And my idea is saying, look, you're going to pay us for the equivalent of 3 years in instruction.
Okay.
If you can demonstrate competency in the 12 areas that we've set up, and you do it in a year, God bless you, you're not getting a refund, but God bless you. If it takes you 10 years, fine, but you're not paying any more than the 3. It's just basically your pace and the way that you learn, and we'll have lectures, we have seminars, we have tutorials, we have reading lists, we'll
Sounds
coach you.
very individualistic. Yeah.
And ironically, it also helps to build community.
Right.
The students actually help each other out. It's a system where I think it's just basically you leave it to individual responsibility, but we're coaching. I think increasingly, as I teach, I think myself as a coach. I'm saying, here's what you need to know to get to this. But it's not my achievement.
Yeah, that's a very helpful thought. What do you all think? Other questions or follow-ups on this? other topics.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
As somebody who's sort of opted out of certain things, I mean, do you find some of the gadgets that you use to get in the way of your contemplative, leisurely opportunity for reflection, namely education, as understood by Brent? Or is it all going fine?
You're directing your question to
And anyone. So maybe, I mean, this is more, I'm questioning anybody who's willing to say, well, this is something I'm struggling with balancing technology and my capacity for reflection. That's, I think, really, not necessarily, you know, I have no problem getting the information I need. That's not it. It's, do I have the ability to think about what it is that we're here trying to learn, and the thoughts that we're trying to develop, the capacity to think. And of course, that's connected to how we live. It wouldn't be worth it if it didn't change how life goes. So, you know, anyone, especially if you think, you know, this part of technology that I have to deal with seems to be clearly helping this endeavor or clearly subverting the endeavor. Let's just say to think. Any thoughts on that score? This is kind of a test.
Yeah, I think just thinking about it, like culture has to do a lot with it.
Yeah.
Because culturally it depends where you come from. So like personally, I tend to put away technology and focus when I'm home with the family versus where I'm at work. And then the use of technology becomes like tools.
Okay.
So the other thing is working more like a hospital setting, using technology now when the patient comes in, for example, to record everything. So I get a lot of feedback that there's that no interpersonal relation is going on, and that has become where they feel more isolated, not paying attention to, and that human contact disappears. So that's my observation.
And Kate, and then there's a few others over here. Kate, what would you say?
In response to your question, I would say I feel like I definitely struggle with balancing all the technological options available in this particular time in history. And I don't know if that's because I'm a returning student and the first time I went to college it was very different. And it's not so much a matter of that it's easier or worse. It seems to me like it's just a different version.
Yeah.
And I find myself, in listening to all the talks this evening, thinking of versions of things. And there's a book, I think it's called Simulacra and Simulation, that talks about symbols and versions and copies of things. And at some point we kind of get back, you know, so much, and where's the kind of, there's been some discussion of the real interaction and where do you find the value or the original, and concepts of what is original.
Thank you. Let's hear from a few other people. Jeff?
So I know with me, one thing I've noticed is I grew up in like a religious family, religious schools, all through undergrad, postgrad. And I found myself always surrounded by people who thought very similarly to me. And so it was difficult to get like differing opinions or to get different views on things. And I've noticed that through increased use of social media, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, online chat room type things, I've begun to get some different opinions, and it's actually kind of helped me with the way that I think and bringing in kind of a different viewpoint on things.
That's great. Let's see, in the back of the room.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that this is where Brent's distinction between pilgrim and nomad is so helpful, because like in this, in terms of technology, a nomad is just going to be sort of at the mercy of the technoscape, trying to adjudicate, you know, can I do this and not this? How do I navigate this world? We can't opt out of, you know, you can opt out of some technologies. You know, the iPad causes me to struggle, so I read a book. Well, the book is technology, you know, I mean, we have technology, and so it's a question of trying to discern. So that's where I think the difference is. A pilgrim is somebody who's on a journey with a destination, and so there is this sense of contemplating that as an individual and as a community, accountability, discerning that together. And so, like, of course, there are some technologies for some people, for all people, that are maybe more beneficial than others, but we can't, like, we often think that we can sort of opt out of everything or reject it all, but there's blessing and curse to every technology. And so that's, I think, that the emphasis of Pilgrim here is recognizing we have a goal, we have a destination. And so thinking in light of that helps, I think, make sense of what technologies we can and can't use, or how to use them, that sort of thing.
So idea, destination, and purpose is part of it.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think Sean, Aaron?
I was just going to say, I mean, in a big way too, I think technology helps with relationships because it allows you to stay in touch with people you may not have been able to. I mean, I know some of my classmates know this, but I have a 98-year-old grandfather who FaceTimes. And he can't travel anymore, but it's been great when I bought a house to be able to show him around. And so being able to keep my connection with my grandfather has grown because of technology, which I think is definitely a benefit.
I was going to talk about the distraction part. I carry 2 cell phones 24 now. And that's my distraction because I've got work and personal life. So instead of maybe doing some educational stuff, I'm distracted by work or personal matters. So definitely a big factor.
How do you deal with that?
Huh? Leave one in the car.
Okay.
Or if you'd like to borrow one, I can give you a
Okay. Good example. Anyone else? Yeah, please.
I would agree that to an extent technology distracts me personally, but it's again, every time I'm using any kind of technology, let me continue with the example of social media. I know if I'm just, constantly looking into my FB page, or if I really want to connect with someone whom I cannot meet on LinkedIn, but actually move ahead in my career, for example, as a goal. So every time it's a choice, which I'm not very conscious about at times, or in the mood I am maybe.
I have a question for the professor. When our lives are being changing drastically, like we are being tracking by our cell phones, or we are deprived of our real life. Instead of this, the real life experience has been disappearing. So, in all human history, there has been social movements against these kind of new innovations. But do you think there is actually some kind of social movement which can prevent this drastic change in deprivation of real life experience? Or we only have this ethical boards and talking all the time. I mean, is there a real movement, do you think?
I don't know.
We're talking about billions of people.
Right. Well, I mean, I think you put it well when you mentioned LinkedIn to promote your career, but not to use obsessively just to fill up boredom or something like that. And so, I mean, you can imagine a movement where everybody makes a pledge not to use technology simply to fill boredom. But of course, this would never take off, right? I don't imagine that. But it's not necessarily so different from pledging, not to drink or not to use illicit drugs. There are plenty of religious traditions where these are spiritual practices. It's not part of mine necessarily, but I don't see. I mean, if the case for certain kinds of uses of technology or new technology are so strong, namely because something about them is so powerfully attractive in a way where they constantly are pulling you away from contemplation. And if that is part of the nature of them, and in a sense that's part of why they're constantly, basically being bought, right? I mean, that's part of the story is why do people constantly want the new, iPhone or the new smartphone or whatever? And part of it is because there's just so many things that seem irresistible. Is that right? And then a lot of things that are like that have historically been seen as obstacles in the path to, in a sense, communion with the truth, communion with God, or communion, I mean, if we're speaking from a Christian perspective, obstacles to spiritual formation. Well, response has classically been some fairly focused religious teaching in communities about how to structure one's life vis-a-vis these things. And so I don't know how that would go. I mean, I think it's too new. A lot of people, we're still how many years into living with the internet? 30 some years. So we'll see how religious communities respond to how the young people in their communities are growing up with the gadgets and everything that goes with them, and how that is impacting fundamental values that, on reflection, one sees as worth saving and trying to pass on from generation to generation. And I guess we'll see. But I'm not hopeless that there can't be, as we deal with a number of these technologies and mature, so to speak, in our relationship with them, from this is the new thing, and it's just great, to, and find a place in between. As we mature in our relationship, there may be some very interesting, concrete, pretty well-received best practices for finding that balance. I'm pretty sure we're not there yet, but you might figure it out. I encourage you to do it, but don't be hopeless. Don't just say, well, it's just going to happen. That's not always the case. Brent knows more of the history, I'm sure, of ways in which certain responses to technology have been identified as too important not to figure it out, if you know what I mean.
Well, I think, then it's a history of sometimes really bad predictions, bad prohibitions. I mean,
Yeah.
Socrates never wanted philosophy written. Destroyed philosophy. That Plato, his best student, who ignored him.
That's right.
Wrote everything. And did it destroy philosophy? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do know there's a difference between conversation that is philosophical as opposed to simply reading philosophical text. And I think one can't substitute for the other. And that's what you got to keep recognition. If you have about 45 minutes, go on to a TED's talk, which itself is, by the way, a high-tech form of a kind of Chautauqua meeting.
Chautauqua.
That's what the founder of TED said. Is that Sherry Turkle's talk on when she's promoting Alone Together, book. She does a very nice job of saying, look, what she worries about is that technology promises to shape our intimacies, and it's not doing that. They can't do that. It's never was intended to. And she starts saying, now people are texting at funerals and thinking nothing of it. And so, but I think on the more hopeful side, sometimes I think when you begin to use the technology, actually what it does is you have a reaction then to it, saying you realize what you're missing. What I mean by that is, like, I've been doing this 15-year commute, and every night I call my wife, and then first of all, it's this telephone, and that sort of thing. Well, I know I shouldn't be mentioning this because I'm in Seattle, this is Android land, but when my wife and I started FaceTiming, when we both went over to the dark side and that actually at first this was great, we could see each other. And this was really, but now what we're saying is actually now to be able to see each other makes the absence harder. Because it's a simulacrum of actual appearance, and yet she's there and yet not there.
Right.
So it really emphasizes the absence more than it does. The present now is FaceTime still better, or a more neutral term, is video conferencing better than this disembodied book? Yeah, but in other ways it made it much more difficult. So that's the thing. I think that eventually people might take a step back and say there are certain kinds of practices we want to recapture, certain kinds we want to preserve. But by the way, Patrick, I would urge you to kind of join the digital age. There are certain I mean, the Summa for $1.99 on Kindle Reader's bargain. And it's searchable.
Yeah. No, I get it on my laptop.
Well, I realize we're nearing the end of our time. Remaining, any last questions we want to throw out there? Yeah? Well, then we want to thank you for your participation tonight. Brent, thank you. Jessica, thank you very much. Patrick, we're